There are places you can visit once and forget, and then there are places that stay with you, even when you leave. I didn't believe in haunted places when this happened. I still don't know if I do, but I know this much. Whatever we heard in that forest wasn't meant for us to hear, and I know we weren't supposed to see that chapel. I grew up just outside Porto Princesa, back when Palawan still felt isolated from the rest of the world. Tourism hadn't really arrived yet. Nights were darker, roads were fewer, and the forest felt closer to everything. My best friend growing up was Marco. His family owned a coconut farm near the mangrove line, where the jungle slowly swallowed the land before giving way to the sea. I spent more time at his house than my own. We lived outside, fishing, climbing trees, building shelters, sleeping under tarps when we could get away with it. The forest wasn't scary to us. It felt like freedom. And when you're young, you don't think about how easy it is to get lost. Short pause for narration here. When we were teenagers, we discovered an old logging path that cut deep through the mangrove forest. The companies had left years before, but the trail remained straight, quiet, and empty. We treated it like our own private world. We camped there dozens of times. Nothing strange ever happened, which is probably why we didn't hesitate to go back years later. By 2014, life had changed. I was living in Manila, working long hours, barely visiting home. Marco had stayed behind, married, and taken over the farm. When I came back that summer, everything felt smaller, familiar, but distant. One night, after a few beers, we started talking about those old trips, the kind of conversation where every memory sounds better than it probably was. And like idiots, we decided to do it again. Just one night, one walk, for old time's sake. Marco's wife told us it was a bad idea. She said the forest wasn't the same anymore. I remember laughing. I wish I hadn't. The path was narrower than we remembered. Trees had grown over parts of it, roots breaking through the ground. The air felt heavier. The deeper we walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, just insects. At one point, Marco stopped and said, half joking, "Feels different now." I agreed, but neither of us said why, because the truth was, it felt like we were being watched. We found it just before sunset. A structure half hidden beyond a slope. At first, just a shape between trees. Then the outline became clear. A chapel, small, rotting, dark with nearly black from years of rain. No path leading to it. No sign anyone should be there. The windows were empty holes. The doorway open like a mouth. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There was nothing obviously wrong about it, but every instinct said not to go closer, so we didn't. We went back to camp, and that should have been the end of it. Night in the mangroves comes fast. One minute you can see the trees, the next everything disappears beyond a few meters. We lay in our hammocks talking quietly, trying to ignore how dark it felt. Then Marco said, "Do you hear that?" At first I didn't. Then the sound carried through the trees. Singing, low, slow, many voices together, coming from the direction of the chapel. We moved without speaking, climbing back up the slope. No flashlights, just moonlight and instinct. And when we reached the top, we saw light inside the chapel, flickering orange candlelight. Shadows moved along the walls. The singing stopped. A deep voice began chanting. Not Filipino, not English, something older. Each phrase answered by the others. The sound felt wrong. Not loud, but heavy, like it pressed against your chest. The chanting grew faster. The voices rose together into a long, drawn-out sound that didn't feel like singing anymore. It sounded like mourning or calling. I covered my ears, then silence, complete silence. Marco squeezed my arm. They're coming out. Figures walked out in a line, holding hands. Some carried lights. They began moving toward the hill. Toward us, we ran. Back to camp, grabbed our bags, left half our gear behind. Branches snapping, breathing loud, no talking. When we reached the path, I looked back once. Lights were moving through the trees, not fast, but searching. We made it to the road hours later. Nobody believed us. They said it was probably locals, maybe. But I grew up around churches. I know what prayer sounds like, and whatever we heard that night wasn't prayer. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if we'd walked closer, or worse, if we hadn't run. Some people grow up afraid of the dark. I grew up afraid of the light, because in the church I was raised in, the lights were always on, and someone was always watching. Even now, years after leaving, I still wake up some nights convinced I hear singing outside my door, slow, patient, waiting for me to come back. I was born in Prague in the early 2000s, in a neighborhood where old buildings leaned into narrow streets and history never really felt past. Tourists saw beauty there, old cathedrals, cobblestone alleys, lanterns glowing at night. But the place I grew up in wasn't one of those churches people photographed. It was called the House of Eternal Light. At least, that's what they called it in English. In Czech, the name sounded older, heavier, something closer to the light that never leaves. My mother joined before I was born. My father followed later. By the time I was old enough to understand anything, the church wasn't something we attended. It was everything. Services every evening, longer gatherings on weekends, special prayers before sunrise, special prayers after midnight. The building itself never seemed to sleep, and neither did the people inside it. The rules began early. Girls wore long skirts, sleeves below the elbow, no makeup, no jewelry, hair always tied back. Men and women sat apart during service, men on the left, women on the right. We were told it was about purity. But even as a child, I noticed how often purity was discussed in whispers, how often girls were corrected for things they didn't understand, a laugh that was too loud, a skirt that moved too much when walking, eyes that lingered too long on someone else. Everything meant something. Everything could be wrong, and someone always noticed. I remember once, when I was very young, being called forward during a donation ceremony. I must have been 3 or 4. My mother dressed me in a white dress with lace that scratched my arms. When I reached up to place money into the box, my dress lifted slightly. The pastor laughed. He said something about temptation entering the temple even through children. Everyone laughed. I didn't understand why my mother laughed too. I only remember feeling suddenly ashamed, without knowing what I'd done. That feeling never really went away. As I grew older, the church began to feel less like faith and more like surveillance. Women corrected each other constantly. Older members watched the younger ones. Rumors spread quickly about who talked to whom, who stayed out too late, who dressed improperly. Girls my age were married young, quickly, often to men much older. It was described as protection, but it never looked like protection to me. It looked like escape. By 14, I had anxiety so bad I pulled strands of my own hair out without realizing it. School felt distant. The future felt pointless. Everything outside the church was described as dangerous, sinful, empty. And yet, the church itself was where I felt the most afraid. Not because of anything supernatural, because of how easily people disappeared from conversations after questioning things. One week, someone was there. The next week, they weren't. And nobody asked why. The worst nights were the revivals. They happened several times a year. The lights stayed on all night. People prayed loudly, cried, begged for forgiveness. Some claimed to speak in unknown languages. The sound filled the entire building. Dozens of voices, overlapping, rising and falling like waves. As a teenager, I remember sitting there, exhausted, waiting to feel something everyone else claimed to feel. But I felt nothing. Only fear. Because when people didn't receive the blessing, they were told to try harder, pray longer, repent more deeply. The implication was clear. If you felt nothing, something inside you was broken. I stopped attending regularly at 16. At first, quietly, pretending to be sick, waiting in the car, finding excuses. My father was furious. My mother was quieter. She knew forcing me would only push me further away. Eventually, I left home entirely. For a while, I made terrible decisions just to stay away. Bad relationships, unstable living situations, anything that felt like freedom. It took years before I realized I didn't need to run anymore. I just needed distance. When my father died years later, I returned to the church for the first time in almost a decade. The building hadn't changed. Same lights, same songs, same smell of wax and old wood. But something felt different. During the service, people spoke less about my father and more about obedience, about returning to the light, about lost souls finding their way back. It didn't feel like mourning. It felt like recruitment. As the singing began, I felt the same cold fear I remembered from childhood. The voices rising together, echoing through the hall. For a moment, I had the overwhelming sensation that everyone was looking at me, not with anger, with expectation, like they believed I would eventually return. I live a different life now, a normal one. University, work, relationships, plans for the future. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up thinking I hear singing outside my window. Soft, familiar. And for a few seconds, before I'm fully awake, I feel like I'm still there. Still sitting on the right side of the room, still being watched. Because the truth is, some places don't need ghosts. Sometimes the horror is simply realizing how long you lived without being allowed to think for yourself, and wondering how many people are still inside, believing the light is keeping them safe, when really, it never lets them leave.